I attended undercover an event in Hollywood that was all about how we can push back against anti-trafficking organizations, and there was a lot of anger in the room, a lot of fear in the room, not really much acknowledgement of children shouldn't be accessing our content. It was like they're coming after our businesses, these multi-million-dollar anti-trafficking organizations coming after our struggling little industry. And I was like, I'm pretty sure you're the billion-dollar industry and we're the non-profits.
My name's Ian Henderson, and I'm the founder of the Naked Truth Project. What happens when you bring 6 leading voices together to talk about pornography? In the P-Word Talks, I travel across the country to have honest, eye-opening conversations with experts including Dr. Paula Hall, Helen Taylor, Dr. Alex Bailey, Dr. Ellie Hansen, Lord James Bethel, and Dame Rachel D'Souza. They come from different backgrounds: mental health, safeguarding, politics, and public advocacy. And they don't always agree with each other, or with us at Naked Truth on every point. But they do agree on this: porn is causing real harm, and it's time we talked about it. Helen, thanks so much for being here and being part of this in sunny Cambridge. Quite a rare.
It's a gorgeous day.
Yeah, quite rare for us anyway here in England. So you don't live in England anymore. Mm-hmm. You were just saying you live in LA.
I do. I suffer in sunny California, and I'm very grateful to live out there.
How long have you been there?
3 years in LA and 12 years in the States altogether.
Okay.
But I'm from London in England originally.
Yeah, so you work for an organisation called Exodus Cry. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about Exodus Cry, what they do and what your role is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Exodus Cry began as a series of prayer meetings back in 2007 when our founder Ben Ginolo discovered the widespread nature of the issue of sex trafficking. And out of those prayer meetings came, he's a filmmaker by background, and he began making a series of videos that turned into a documentary called Nefarious about the global sex trade and sex trafficking in all its different cultural contexts. And so the organization now still makes films and documentaries and does widespread campaigns and policy work with the hope to shift minds and change laws to fight trafficking. So we have a real focus on prevention and addressing demand. And then we provide trauma therapy to a lot of survivors and do outreach in all the places where trafficking exists, both in the States and around the world. So I was the director of outreach and over all the victim services for the first 8 years, and now I'm the vice president of impact, which is a fancy title and basically means I get to just really have vision for executing the furthest impact, the widest impact, the deepest impact on the one and the millions on this issue.
Amazing. And I guess, I always say this about what I do in Naked Truth. You know, I didn't sit down with my careers advisor when I was at school and say I might start a porn project. There's normally a journey, isn't there, and a story into this kind of work. I'd love to hear a little bit about why, for you, you're doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Well, I think I was raised by 2 incredible and quite socially conscious parents who had a real heart for God and desire to make the world a better place in front of them. And when I was about 11 years old, my dad would take me shopping in London, and in certain pockets of London where there were the red telephone boxes which had adverts promoting women in prostitution on the inside of those telephone boxes, my dad would make a point of going inside each one, taking down all those postcards, putting them in the bin, even if it was 7 or 8 telephone boxes that we'd walk past. And he had this conviction that women shouldn't be advertised like a pizza inside a telephone box. Women shouldn't be for sale. And said, even if these guys put all these postcards up again next week, if I can stop one man from making one phone call, it's important. And so I remember being a young teenager and even thinking about the lives of these women. And then when I was about 16 years old, I got lost in a part of London and realized I'd walked down this alleyway and there was a strip club at the end of the street, a peep show, an adult bookstore, and all in this one little area. And there was a woman wearing this red dress standing inside the doorstep of a building. And just from judging the situation, I realized this was a brothel, or there was some illicit sexual activity taking place inside this building. And my first response was this real anger on her behalf. that what kind of society allows any vulnerable woman to be put in this position where I could be this angry, misogynistic, violent, perverted man, and just because I have £50 in my pocket, that somehow gives me this power to purchase the sexual consent of a vulnerable woman who may have zero sexual desire for me, but I'm somehow able to use that power and agency to purchase her silence and exploit her. Like, as a 16-year-old, I just had this immediate understanding of the unequal power dynamic in prostitution and the exploitation of vulnerability of this woman who looked like she was from Eastern Europe. And my second thought was, I just want to buy this woman a rose, give her a some kind of token of her beauty and self-worth, look in her in the eyes and tell her that I see her and she's a valuable, amazing woman and how much God loves her. And so I actually walked down the street, turned the corner and started searching for a florist. And after about 20 minutes, I couldn't find one. And I was so emotionally impacted by this situation. I'd been crying and I felt like I should just get on the train and go home. And I didn't want to offend her by giving her a rose. And anyway, I wrote about this encounter in my journal on that train ride home. And later on at university, found out about the global scope of human trafficking, because back then I had no idea that she might have been recruited by a pimp, she might have been trafficked. Like, to me, it was just the core fundamentals of prostitution is exploiting the vulnerability, and we're failing women as a society if we allow someone to be in that situation. And to find out that 42 million women and children are trapped in prostitution, that slavery is very much manifested through sexual exploitation and trafficking. So I actually moved to Cambodia after university as an art therapist, and it was beginning this journey with survivors and knowing my world would never be the same again after hearing their stories and really getting an understanding of how this was operating in different nations. And then joining an organization that was not only assisting the women out and providing those services that they needed so much, but taking a step back and saying, what's our 20-year plan for how to actually uproot this? We want to go further upstream. We don't want to only address the symptoms, but really go after the cause and change laws, what's working, what's not, and how do we actually shift the culture? How do we tell a better story? And so filmmaking is a massive part of that. And I think it really connects to what you guys are even trying to do, because there are some really toxic, harmful and untrue stories about sex and porn and sexuality that are being told in the culture right now, and it's important to address those and really shine a light on what's actually happening.
Thank you for sharing that, Helen. So how old were you when you were going around with your dad?
Like 11, 12, 13 years old.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I'm very aware some girls grow up with their fathers watching pornography, and my dad, on the other hand, is going inside telephone boxes and tearing down these postcards out of a conviction that women are far more valuable than to be advertised like a pizza in a telephone box.
Yeah. So Helen, let's talk a little bit about trafficking. I guess it would be really helpful just even to define it. I mean, I think most of us feel like we know what that means, but how would you define trafficking and in particular sex trafficking? Yeah.
Well, the internationally recognised legal definition of trafficking is anyone in the sex trade under the age of 18. So whether it doesn't matter if a 14-year-old is consenting or not, if they're under 18, they're legally classified as a child when it comes to a commercial sex act taking place. Or if they are over 18 and an aspect of fraud, force or coercion is taking place. And a lot of people assume trafficking refers only to the physical force or the guerrilla pimp who's using threats of violence or chaining someone, transporting them in a cage, and that is actually definitely the minority of what we see in trafficking. Fraud and psychological coercion is a lot more commonplace. You could compare it more to the brainwashing of a cult and the grooming process, the recruitment process, and that is much more effective in keeping people in, because if they take on that identity, trauma bond with their trafficker, they're much less likely to escape. So yes, there are often the psychological chains, the threats of violence, the invisible chains keeping someone in that life. So from the outside, they might not look like they're being exploited or enslaved, but that is the internationally recognized definition, and that can take place in pornography, not just in human trafficking. And it's different to human smuggling. A lot of people think that someone has to be trafficked across international borders to be a victim of trafficking. Someone could be trafficked in the basement of their own house and never leave, and that if there are individuals come into that place to purchase a commercial sex act in a situation of forced prostitution, that is absolutely trafficking.
And so with that in mind, it'd be helpful for us, because we are focusing on pornography, to begin to understand then how you would say the porn industry and pornography as a form, how is that therefore creating demand or enabling in any way sex trafficking?
Yeah, there are so many intersections between pornography and trafficking, and about 5 years ago, Exodus Cry actually really began intentionally investigating that and exposing some of these intersections. But just to the first part of the question, how porn fuels demand for trafficking, I remember the first time I made that connection in person was when I was living in Cambodia, working with a teenage victim of trafficking who had been trafficked from a rural village in Cambodia to the big city, the capital of Phnom Penh, age 11. And she told me that in the brothel where she was being trafficked from Western men from Europe, from Australia, from the US, she described, would bring their devices on their phone, their computers, their tablets, and show her the pornography that they would want her to reenact. And so to me, that was such a clear example of pornography and a porn addiction specifically is driving the demand for a man from America waking up and deciding to fly across the world to purchase exploitation with a trafficked girl.
Yeah.
And so we see pornography as the market for prostitution. It's advertising prostitution. We made a documentary called Buying Her that comes out this year, and every single former sex buyer that we interviewed described how their journey as a sex buyer all began being exposed to pornography as a child, and that long-standing porn addiction where the dopamine of the type of porn they were watching just wasn't enough. And as we know, the novelty factor or the intensity, the escalation factor in pornography led them to want to act out what they were seeing with a person. And it doesn't mean that every person who watches porn becomes a sex buyer, but for every sex buyer that we've ever interviewed, that any other organization I know has interviewed, it all began with a fantasy from pornography. So that's how we see porn fueling the demand. But because a lot of trafficking is happening both in these studios and on the websites, even by participating in porn, by viewing it online or financially contributing to this industry, there is a ripple effect that is creating a demand for porn or that type of genre where girls are trafficked into. So there's actually lots of intersections, but those are two of the main ones we've seen.
Yeah, so just again, just trying to help people understand that a little bit more. So you're saying that there's a fueling in the sense that, as you say, maybe victims of trafficking or survivors that you've worked with would be saying, yeah, I was being shown pornography and being told this is what I want to happen now. Yeah. Have you also found with those survivors them saying, oh, actually pornography was made of me whilst I was a victim as well? Is that another way in which we see that connection?
100%. So I would actually say the majority of survivors that I've worked with that I've ever asked that question described having the exploitative sex acts that they were involved with being filmed, often by the trafficker, or they were told to film it, either as to keep them safe as part of this is a safety precaution, but more often than not, the trafficker would see this as a way to make dual income. So not only are you selling the trafficking victim over and over again, much more than any drug that could possibly be sold, you are able to then sell the content online of the victim. And it's hard to get accurate statistics on just how high that percentage is, but I know more and more we're seeing that being an additional way that trafficking victims are being exploited. And when we started the campaign against Pornhub, Traffickinghub, we had a lot of trafficking victims specifically reach out to us saying, during my trafficking period, videos were taken of me that are on Pornhub.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that is difficult, isn't it, for people maybe to understand that if they are scrolling through Pornhub, it's very difficult to know, whether a person who they're scrolling past is consensual and they feel they're in control and all those things, or whether it is someone who has been coerced, and even just that is very difficult to discern. I mean, with that in mind, do you think this is a problem that can be solved by the likes of Pornhub? I know people use this term big porn. And again, maybe we want to define what we mean by even that language of big porn, but these massive companies who maybe run a number of websites, I guess is what people are meaning by that, and Pornhub would be, one website owned by a bigger company. Can those companies solve any of this? Do you feel there's any role they can play?
Well, I think the term big porn kind of evolved out of the term that was already being used a lot in our culture of big tech, referring to Meta, formerly Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and just the nature of these massive widespread companies that are being accessed and used by huge percentages of our culture, and recognizing that the tremendous power, influence, money that they earn and hold. And so with porn sites, it's not the little Playboy magazine, it's not just a few studios in LA where I live. It's actually multi-million, billion-dollar companies with millions of videos that are being accessed, more than Netflix and Amazon combined. So it's just even a way to acknowledge the scope that several of these websites are among the top 10 websites of any traffic site in that country, in the world. And we basically, in 2020, our team exposed how a site like Pornhub was not verifying the age or consent of any video being uploaded, and that all it took to upload a video onto Pornhub was an email address being required. So they didn't verify the age or consent of the person uploading or any of the potential people in those videos. So those are two things that we really say are absolutely fundamental to attempt to prevent the most exploitative content being uploaded. We were seeing that there was a case in the media of a 15-year-old girl who was trafficked and missing in Florida. 58 videos of her rape and abuse were found on Pornhub. That was even how her mother was able to find her. The Sunday Times found children as young as 3 on Pornhub. And so what we really exposed was there was a massive lack of regulation, and that this website that was actually owned by a company called MindGeek, they're called ILO now, who owned about 80% of all online porn. So even though Pornhub is the most known and popular site, as well as, say, X videos, these companies own thousands of other sites, and there's thousands of other spin-off sites that will download the content on these sites and then repost them and re-upload them. So we were hearing from trafficking victims and underage girls at that time who were saying, not only are there or were there videos of me being trafficked or raped or abused or unconscious rape by someone they knew. They weren't even aware that this content was online until someone informed them. All manner of horrific situations. One survivor called it the immortalization of her trauma. She said, I'm trying to heal and move on from the worst thing that ever happened to me, this gang rape. But how can I when videos of it are being monetized by this site? It's been so impossible to get the videos taken down. And even after I did, I have to check every morning to see if it's been re-uploaded because of the download button. And so we just took a step back and realized that there was such a woeful lack of regulation, and that these companies were choosing profit over people. They were choosing money because the more content they had on their website, the more clicks and traffic they got. And a whistleblower came forward and told us there were only about 30 moderators on Pornhub at that time, when Facebook had about 15,000 moderators. And so for that to be the setup of a site that in a lot of the public's mind was a quote-unquote ethical porn site, or they just assumed that because of the successful branding, and New York Times Square had a billboard advertising Pornhub, they partnered with New York Fashion Week, like in the pop culture, this website had been very much validated, and we pulled the mask off and showed how was actually rife with trafficking, and Pornhub had no way of knowing even what percentage of those videos were illegal content.
Yeah, I mean, and that was how long ago, that campaign?
5 years in 2020.
Yeah, okay. And do you feel, I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but I mean, do you feel the dial has shifted at all in that time as you look now as an organisation? I'm sure there's still a lot more that you're campaigning for, but does it feel like there has been a change there?
Yeah, I feel like, well, the first biggest victory was that the New York Times reached out to us. They saw our petition and wanted to do an investigation themselves. They found non-consensual content on the site within 10 minutes, and it was on the front page of the New York Times. And so seeing the power of the media, an award-winning journalist really shining a light on that. The credit card companies within a few days did cut ties with Pornhub, so MasterCard, Visa, Discover, even though we'd been in communication with them all year. And this campaign really grew into a movement where there were lots of other organizations who wanted to help and raise awareness. So the credit card companies did cut ties, which we felt like was a victory. I think they realized that they could be facilitating illegal videos. And then Pornhub deleted around 10 million videos a few days later, which amounts to, now we know, 91% of their site at the time. They released a statement blaming us and another organization, which we took as giving us credit. But that felt like the first breakthrough in mass awareness of what was taking place and actual accountability. So for so long, they were getting away with it. And they were like, oh, this little anti-trafficking organization with their cute little petition. Like, they were very dismissive of us. But we saw that for the first time, I feel like there was a bit of an awakening in the culture of, oh, like trafficking and porn really could overlap. And that's quite problematic and quite troubling. And just that public pressure, we know, is what helps laws get introduced. So suddenly lawmakers were interested in speaking to us about better protections online, and how do we enforce laws to require these sites to enforce agent consent verification, and the credit card companies as well, recognizing the power and leverage that they have to call for change as well. So we just saw a few different major players of accountability get involved and speak up. And I feel like prior to 5 years ago, it wasn't really even in the cultural conversation about trafficking in porn, or that, that there's more permission to be critical of porn now than there ever has been. Yeah. So that's exciting, and I feel like that is progress. Pornhub has conceded to a few of our demands and others' demands. I know that from our perspective, there should be more criminal consequences for what they've done as a company. Yeah. But I feel like there is just a lot more of a general understanding of the importance of agent consent verification now.
And how, for example, how does a user-generated site like Pornhub continue to make money if there's been this kind of, or maybe those payment, MasterCard and others are now back with them, are they? Or how's that happening now that those changes took place?
Yeah, well, it kind of became apparent that Visa was still partnering with some of the other websites that they own, and so actually some of the survivors now are not only suing the company that owns Pornhub, but they're suing Visa and even MasterCard, I believe. So, but every time someone even visits a site like Pornhub, just by visiting it alone, the click, the ad revenue that they're able to make just from visitors and from ads. But yeah, there are some questions that we still have of how are they still making so much money. And so there's probably things going on behind the scenes that I don't even know, but they have some very wealthy investors, and they own a lot of other successful porn companies as well, and studios.
You mentioned the term ethical porn.
Quote unquote ethical.
Yeah, well, that's what I want to ask you is, I mean, do you think there's even, from your personal perspective, or organisationally as well as Exascribe, do you think that's possible? Is ethical porn possible?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked me that, because I think that is a question that often comes up when we're talking about, the worst criminal type of pornography. I think that people even asking that it often indicates to me that they're aware that there is such a thing as unethical porn. I would always ask someone to define ethical for me, because what might be ethical for you is actually just legal. You're just describing legal porn as opposed to illegal or underage porn. And depending on how someone would define ethical porn, I think a lot of the times they're referring to how it's made, and to try and make sure that people are actually being paid to participate in porn, that they're actually consenting, and that consenting process is happening to a degree. I've been thinking about this recently, and I think for me it's similar to asking the question of what about ethical tobacco? And when we talk about regulating the big tobacco industry, a lot of it was on yes, the way that they advertise, the way that maybe the tobacco is produced. There's not like child labour or exploitation taking place in how tobacco is being made and produced. But it almost seems like a bit of a silly phrase, ethical tobacco, because everything we know now about tobacco and its connection to cancer, especially the harms on children. We have age requirements on when you can purchase cigarettes. We have an understanding of the harms of secondhand smoke. Especially in Europe, the regulations around cigarette boxes and having to frame it as a public health issue. And so for me, pornography isn't just about the ethics of how it's made and making sure that's legal, of course, but it's about the ethics of the effect on the consumer as well, especially children. And so I just think when someone asks that, you're almost jumping to the wrong question. I'm like, there's 100 other things around pornography that we need to talk about first before we even get into what you might define as ethical porn. And I think at the heart of it is them asking the question of what porn is it okay for me to watch that doesn't hurt anyone else, when actually there's always an element of harm to themselves. And it's very difficult to actually analyse, even if someone signs a consent form and they're over 18, what is their story of what led that girl to making that decision to be in porn? Is she on drugs? What's the state of her current mental health? Was she so extremely sexually abused as a child that this is a way of her trying to reclaim some of her power by getting paid for doing things that she was forced to do? I mean, I've heard so many stories of girls who were in pornography and they wouldn't be legally classified as a trafficking victim, but the stories of what led them into that and what they experienced on porn sets, many of them are in our counselling program actually, and suffer with a lot of trauma from that. So I'm much more interested in talking about the real lives of the people involved in porn, and it's up to someone else whether, you know, after knowing all that, they choose to still consume. But our position isn't to criminalise someone from smoking, but we'd want them to be aware of all the facts of how it's harming them, how it's definitely harming a child that might be inhaling that secondhand smoke. And as a culture, do we want to encourage the use of widespread smoking or restrict the use of widespread smoking?
Yeah. So do you feel, Helen, then there are any actionable steps that the porn industry and maybe wider society could be taking that would in some way address the problem of trafficking and the overlap with pornography?
Yeah. Well, I think that in an immediate sense, some laws that I would want to see passed tomorrow would be age and consent verification of every uploader and every person in every video, and then even much deeper restrictions around consent to make sure that someone is in their right mind, that they maybe have a doctor's note, that they are not high on drugs, so having drug tests before someone enters, maybe even them completing a course warning them of some of the dangers of, like we'd consider any high-risk industry that you enter, a lot of job requirements even, you have to get a certification, you have to get a license, and yet we expect 18-year-old girls to just be thrown into the lion's den, into this industry without any knowledge of some of the harms. So I think that in the next several years, that is the direction we'd want to see. A friend of mine, Gail Dines, calls it the, what does she say? that the goal is to regulate pornography out of existence. If we regulate exploitation and trafficking out of porn, how much of it will even actually be left? And then the other side of it, of course, is protecting children from accessing porn. And we've been campaigning for that for the last 3 years now with our campaign, Protect Children, Not Porn. At the time, I was told America would be the last country in the world possibly to introduce age verification because of the free speech laws, the First Amendment in the Constitution. But we saw the UK pass the online safety bill that gets implemented properly this year. And since we started campaigning in the States, we've had 19 states pass age verification and another 38 introduce. We're currently in conversation with around 10 states who want to pass it right now as well. And so for me, speaking with other countries and other governments as well, there's this real cultural shift of understanding the importance of regulating the porn industry and protecting children. So age and consent verified for people in porn or uploading to porn sites, kids being protected from accessing porn online and meaningful, robust age verification laws. And then another regulation that I would really endorse is raising the age of entry to porn from 18 to 21. The majority of those in porn enter in that window, and they are the most vulnerable. And we see girls, 16, 17-year-olds, being groomed to then enter porn or open an OnlyFans site on their 18th birthday. And just that window of 3 years, I really feel like so many people who choose to go into porn now would actually make a different decision, or they'd go to college, or they'd choose a career that actually was helpful, not harmful to them. So, and that came from me texting a lot of survivors who'd been trafficked in porn saying, if you could pass one regulation in porn tomorrow, what would it be? And all of them said something about raising the age. We also see that the teen porn genre, one of the most widely searched for genres in the world, and the barely legal genre, it's 18-year-olds who are being made to look like prepubescent kids and young girls with pigtails, lollipops, braces on their teeth, the schoolgirl fantasy. And if we could raise that age even just a little older, that would really help eliminate that genre.
Yeah, that's really significant, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned OnlyFans, and it'd be great to just chat a little bit about that, because I guess they have become much more of a kind, again, in the public consciousness, a kind of people who wouldn't be able to name a porn site perhaps have heard of OnlyFans, and they, perhaps because they promote themselves as this kind of empowering and liberating website, you know, they're for the creator, and in that sense, would you disagree with that? That kind of PR that they have? Yeah,
I think I saw them describe themselves as a social media site recently, which felt very ironic because they are absolutely a porn site, absolutely a quote-unquote adult site. The vast majority of their content is pornographic in nature, and everyone knows that it's a pornography site. I think that over the years, there's been a lot of reporting, especially even by the BBC, on underage content still slipping through the cracks, so their moderation process isn't at all as robust as it should be. There was content of bestiality found, children, as in cases, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old that I read about, a 10-year-old, found on OnlyFans. And so there's still some of the problems that exist with Pornhub on OnlyFans. An interesting thing about OnlyFans that a lot of people don't know is the site takes 20% from whatever someone earns on this site. You see 73% of all income generated just goes to the top 10% earners. So the vast majority, I think the average is around £150 or around $180 is what someone makes. So most people are not making money from OnlyFans.
A month or a day, a week?
A month.
Okay.
But a very small percentage are making a lot of money, like huge amounts of money. But it also operates as a pyramid scheme. So if you recruit someone else to join OnlyFans, you can take 5% of what they earn for the first year. And so a lot of people, when they talk about how much money they're making, that's partly, as we see with any other pyramid scheme, a way to recruit others. And if they sign up through you, you can then earn money off of them. So it's not only, is OnlyFans the pimp taking 20% of what people make, it's encouraging and facilitating a pimp culture on their website. And we recently interviewed a woman called Victoria Sinis from Australia who worked as an OnlyFans recruiter, and her whole job was to go on Instagram and find influencers who were posting maybe some more revealing content or provocative photos and recruit them to OnlyFans, and then they would then take a percentage of what they were making as well. So there's all these like different forces trying to make money off of girls. And she shared with us a lot of other things going on behind the scenes, including that when men are talking to their favorite OnlyFans creator, they think they're actually talking to her and they're paying extra money to chat, whereas actually it's offices in the Philippines with guys behind the computer pretending to be the girl. So there's a whole system built in this website. I think it's very culturally concerning in a number of ways. Use the phrase empowering and liberating, which is how they market themselves. There's nothing liberating for young women opening an OnlyFans. They're actually massively restricting all their career prospects. If in 5 years' time they wanted to become a teacher or go into so many different segments of society in their professional life, the internet is forever, and those images could and would likely be used against them. And I'm not endorsing that at all. I'm just saying I almost feel like an older sister wishing I could share with younger girls 18 years old who all they see is this like facade of the glamour and the money of OnlyFans and all the ways that it's not actually liberating or empowering, but actually going to close so many doors and cause so many potential problems. And even if they sign up for an OnlyFans thinking, well, I'm just going to do these kind of pictures, I wouldn't ever do that, within minutes they will have private messages from men offering them more money to do more things. So the pressure, the psychological pressure of their own personal boundaries are completely violated from day one. And so we see from so many girls who begin OnlyFans this trajectory of them making more and more revealing, explicit content, to the degree where right now in the media are two young ladies, Bonnie Blue and Lily Phillips, who famously are friends, and Lily Phillips advertised to have sex with 100 men as part of her OnlyFans, and Bonnie Blue stepped that up to 1,000, and that's being matched. So you see even like the demands of to do something more extreme. It creates this like competition culture with girls even on OnlyFans, and we're just asking the question is of how far is this going to go? It's creating a prostitution culture where young girls are self-objectifying, and I just think like this is the most least empowering, liberating feminist thing for any young girl to be entering. I saw a video recently of all the feet of the men lining up to purchase sex with Lily Phillips. She disassociated for the majority of the experience. She could only remember a couple of the guys. And afterwards there was a video of her sobbing and clearly experiencing some trauma. And I believe her mum is her manager. So in the conversation about OnlyFans, since it exploded on the scene 5 years ago, and the original CEO and founder was a British man, 5 years later we have girls wanting to make such extreme content for their OnlyFans in competition with each other that they are willing to have their bodies rented for sex hundreds of times. Often, 1,000 men in 24 hours, that's about 40 seconds per man. Who are these men lining up, traveling in from around the world? How is this a healthy expression of sexuality? We absolutely need to be calling out all the ways this is so disturbing, concerning, not healthy for any young girls. And the message of objectification and our sexuality being there for consumption is so devastating to me. And I actually spoke at a university in California about this recently and had a young woman come up to me saying, "You're the first person I've ever heard be critical of OnlyFans." And I've secretly felt really like a bit troubled about this website, but to speak out against it comes across like you're speaking out about women and you're not sex positive. But she was like, "I actually agree with every single thing that you've said about OnlyFans." And I think it is really, really troubling the way that our culture is promoting this. It is another porn site. It's another form of pornography that is addictive and causing untold harm to relationships. But even as a woman, if I could speak to any 17-year-old girl who's thinking of opening an OnlyFans on her birthday. It's one of the reasons we want to extend it to the age of 21, to just give them a few more years to make that decision, but to consider all the ramifications of what that is going to do to her life, her relationships, her career prospects, even her own sense of herself, her sexuality, constantly being dictated by people paying her money to do sex acts in front of the camera. It's such a disturbing cultural trend to me, and we absolutely need to feel emboldened to be critical of it, speak out against it. It doesn't mean we're judging the people involved in it. We are saying, as a culture, do we want a culture of prostitution where young girls are celebrated for objectifying themselves for money, or do we want to actually call out how harmful this is to young girls?
Do you, maybe with your work with survivors have experienced this, do you think there's such a thing as almost retrospective trauma? You know, so like, for example, a young woman at the age of 18, 19, 20, feeling like, yes, this is what I want to do, but then maybe 10 years later, actually living through the trauma of decisions they made in those younger years. Is that something you would?
I mean, I think all of us, there's some of the decisions we made at age 18, maybe even 5 years later, we might say, you know, we know our brains aren't fully developed till the age of 25 even, and yet the choice to make pornographic content that's available online for the rest of your life. If you go on to have a family, your children could see that, your children's friends could see that. And many women that I've spoken with during the Traffickinghub campaign who were trying to get those videos taken down, it was actually really tragic because they had to either prove they were underage or prove that they were being trafficked at the time. Like and how do you prove that? That's very difficult. It wasn't a case of you could just say, I don't want that content of me up on your website anymore, please take it down. That's not good enough. This website's making money off you. So a lot of people, even if you delete your OnlyFans account, there's still, those images are still on the internet and still belonging to OnlyFans. So you actually aren't able to delete that content forever. So people don't have...
There's no proprietary rights for the creators.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, I remember this girl telling me that she was 18 years old, recruited into the porn industry. She'd just come out of hospital for a severe mental health condition, and she said, I was not in my right mind to be making pornographic content, and when I see those videos of me, I see myself being raped again and again, and I can't get those videos down even to this day. So just knowing, I mean, the psychological impact of someone knowing that those videos are being consumed by people around the world, downloaded by people around the world, and bringing money to a website, like that is actually a level of trauma that we are still even trying to coin, and that some of the trauma therapists that work with some of the survivors just have described how challenging it is for the survivors to be able to move on when that it's like the exploitation is happening online day in, day out, even after they've moved on from the experience themselves.
Yeah, I mean, part of our work would be, we would work with perhaps partners in relationships where there's been, coercive behaviour from a partner, and even the trauma that causes that individual. Yeah. And that's not a pimp, and so again, you imagine the trauma that is connected to that level of extortation and coercion. Even with OnlyFans, I think I was reading that, I'm just trying to link back to the trafficking really, in terms of, do you think there is evidence or suggestion that there's trafficking within OnlyFans? Are there pimps sort of off camera, sort of so it looks like, I'm working with this individual who's here, but do you know anything about that?
I think it's extremely likely and plausible that not every person making content on OnlyFans is acting independently. And a primary case of that is someone like Andrew Tate, who made a lot of money off recruiting girls through OnlyFans, and even sold his whole program of how to do that, and described himself publicly as a lover boy pimp. And and really laughed at these girls while building this pyramid scheme empire of himself of recruiting girls on OnlyFans. And I think if we just return to the definition of trafficking, if you're induced to do a sex act under any kind of force, fraud or coercion, that's trafficking. And I think that this is taking place much more likely than anyone realizes. And even just thinking back to the idea of ethical porn, I remember attending a debate in London on pornography, and on one side there were two porn critical feminists, and on the other side was a director and producer of porn. And one of the female porn producers said in that debate, I am a creator of feminist ethical porn, and she was explaining her whole company and how she felt she was a very ethical porn producer. And then halfway through the conversation, she just said, I'm giving jobs to single mums and immigrants, some of the most vulnerable in our society. I'm giving them jobs, trying to position herself as some kind of goodwill ambassador, giving jobs to vulnerable people. And I was thinking, you just completely exposed how you're exploiting the vulnerability of women who might be desperate for money and they feel like they don't have any other choices.
Yeah.
And that was, really disturbing to me, even hearing that. And recently, a guy who was formerly a porn producer and has come out, he named one of the most famous, quote unquote, ethical porn producers, who I won't name for legal reasons, but he said off the record, that person is a pimp, and they receive trafficked girls from Russia, and it's their whole brand about ethical porn, but I know what they're doing behind the scenes, and there's trafficking happening. So.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the behind the scenes work, if you like, that you've done. I know you've kind of gone quote unquote undercover in some situations, just to try and understand what is behind that facade, perhaps, that big porn put across. Tell us some of those stories.
Yeah, well, a few years ago, we were doing outreach in a pornography convention. So every year, the AVN Awards in Las Vegas, it's held at typically, it's kind of like the Oscars for the porn industry. So they have like Best Director Awards, Best Actor Award, fill in the blanks. And then they have a convention where the women in porn are behind these booths, and it's like a meet your favorite porn star. So there's tons of men coming to this convention. And I was with a team, including a couple of trafficking survivors on our team, to give out a gift of jewelry and a little handmade painting to each woman, and then a card with access to free trauma therapy and any legal advocacy that they might need. And the second we even just acknowledged the elephant in the room, that we were providing that kind of service, and that women are stuck in contracts that they don't want to be in, or they're experiencing trauma in this industry and might want to receive some psychological help. It was like the facade completely came down, and they were really, really receptive, and were hugging us and sometimes even crying, just like feeling so much genuine zero agenda love, and in contrast to these men lining up to just dehumanize them and exploit them. But while I was there, I remember there was a whole BDSM section with leather whips being sold on a few different booths, and in the corner was a woman who was like 95% naked, tied up to this piece of apparatus, bending over, and there was a line of men lined up with 4 or 5 different whips from these different leather booths to try out on her, and her back was red raw from being whipped. And I walked past, saw this scene, was so horrified, and a guy behind one of the booths said, started describing the leather of the whips to me and said, do you want to test it out? And he offered me a whip to get in line with these men and act it out, like beating a woman. And to me, I remember thinking, it doesn't even matter right now if she's being paid to do this or consenting to do this. Like, there are international definitions of torture, and right now someone is being tortured and being whipped by dozens, possibly hundreds of men, clearly causing some physical injury. Is no one else seeing how deeply disturbing this is? Like, I was so disturbed. I wanted to go full Jesus in the temple, whipping over the tables and grabbing the whips myself. Like, I was so upset, but we had to be undercover. Like, if we'd been disruptive, we would have had to leave and been escorted out. So the whole day, well, we were there for 2 full days. I was trying to just be present and be there for the women. I remember seeing 2 young girls that I'd spoken to. One of them had braces on her teeth, and a couple of hours later they were in gas masks, and there was a whole photo shoot taking place of these girls in gas masks, again tied up, and this whole like kink scene being reenacted. And it was just so violent, so disturbing. I saw guys walking around with girls on leashes, so the girls were like, pretending to be dogs. Again, a form and expression in porn, in BDSM culture. But I was so troubled with what I saw and felt so just devastated that guys were at a place like this and thinking it was normal. I remember chatting to one guy who asked me for my website, and I said, oh no, I'm actually here to offer services and gifts to the women here. And then I just thought to ask him the question, like, I just wondered, do you have a daughter yourself? And he said, oh yeah, I've got a little one. And I said, I'm curious, like, when she grows up, if she worked somewhere like here, how would you feel about that? And he started laughing. He was like, oh, I would never let my girl anywhere near somewhere like this. Are you kidding me? And I said, well, every girl here is someone else's daughters, so I wonder how their fathers would feel that their daughters are here and talking to guys like you. And he kind of sort of laughed a little bit uncomfortably. And then I just felt led to share with him what my relationship with my dad is like. And I said, my dad is my hero. And as a little girl growing up, you learn about how women should be treated from observing how your father treats your mother and other women around you. And I said, your daughter is going to learn so much about herself and men from the way that you treat her. So that puts a lot of responsibility on you. But your daughter needs you to be a hero. She doesn't need you to be at places like this around girls who are being exploited, but she needs you to be a hero. And he just went really quiet, and we talked for a little bit more, and at the end he just shook my hand and said, like, thank you, like I really needed to hear that, and I've got a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, whenever I'm in environments like that with people who are contributing, whether it's the porn users or the pimps or the producers, I really have to try and keep my heart in check and not see them as monsters, but as people. And I attended undercover an event in Hollywood that was all about how we can push back against anti-trafficking organizations regulating us, essentially. Someone in the porn industry sent me a link to that and said, Extra is going to probably be talked about. You should consider wearing a wig and showing up. And so I actually did go, and I stood at the back. I didn't wear a wig, but in that meeting they were talking about how angry they were about age verification being passed in the States. The week before, Louisiana had passed age verification, and there was a lot of anger in the room, a lot of fear in the room. Not really much acknowledgement of children shouldn't be accessing our content. It was like they're coming after our businesses, these multi-million-dollar anti-trafficking organizations coming after our struggling little industry. And I was like, I'm pretty sure you're the billion-dollar industry and we're the non-profits. There was only 8 people on our team the whole year during the Traffickinghub campaign when we were calling out Pornhub. But even in moments like that, I had to have a moment of looking around the room and thinking, if Jesus asked me right now to wash the feet of every single porn director and producer, would I be willing to do it? And I told the Lord that yes, I would be. And for me, if I try so hard to humanize the people and even the perpetrators in this industry, because otherwise I'll become like them. And I don't want to dehumanize anyone, even those contributing to something that I believe causes so much harm. I want to see them as people always, and know that, that man was still a dad with a little girl. And there's been a couple of porn directors that we've gotten to convince to even leave making porn. And one of them just recently made a documentary about trafficking and exploitation in Amsterdam. So he's gone from producing porn to making content exposing exploitation, and he's gone on this like incredible journey. And so I really believe that no one is too far, and that even the villains behind this whole industry, I want to see them doing something different and choosing a different path.
Because you've talked a bit about your faith, I'd love to ask you a couple of questions about that as well. perhaps you've already answered the question, but how do you feel your faith impacts the work that you're doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine doing this work without a faith. It fuels every part of everything that we do, from our zeal for justice and accountability, and our compassion to help women and children being exploited in this, and even our compassion for those who are addicted to porn and so wanting them to get free. Like, we want freedom for every person. I know that it was while I was at university, finding out about sex trafficking in a really the global scale that it was taking place at. My first response was to just cry, and I couldn't stop crying for about 4 hours, and I felt like I had a sense of the Father's heart breaking inside mine, and that song Hosanna was sung a lot at the time, and I remember just thinking in that moment, like, my heart has suddenly begun to break for what his breaks for, and when Jesus said, I call you friends, no longer servants, and I always wanted to be one considered his friends, that I would do the things that he would do and care about the things that he cared about. And I always just wanted to follow him wherever he would lead, and even if it meant working 3 jobs in London for a year so I could volunteer in Cambodia for 6 months. And it took me 6 years to get my green card for Exodus Cry, so I was actually raising support for the first 3 years in faith, just really believing that God had called me to do this. And we've seen so many miraculous breakthroughs, headlines that should not have happened, but we know there's been years and years of hidden prayer. So even the fruit of Exodus Cry that's seen on the outside, there's thousands of hours of hidden prayer in the secret place for the things that we're seeing right now. And that is a huge part of our DNA is prayer, and always will be. And even though we're often interacting in secular spaces, and so it isn't always appropriate to bring our faith into this, I'm deeply inspired by the example of William Wilberforce, who is, most people are very familiar with him, but the British campaigner and politician who abolished the transatlantic slave trade. He was very motivated by his faith. He worked with people of very different mindsets and ideologies and beliefs, but his core community were followers of Jesus, and really compelled to bring about justice from the place of their moral conviction and faith. When looking at the sex trade right now, rife with rape, exploitation, addiction, terrible things causing terrible harm, there's that zeal of Jesus. He's still overturning tables and getting the whips out against the injustice of it all, against the billion-dollar companies exploiting people on their sites. And he's also sitting at the well with the person struggling with addiction, or the woman caught in trafficking, who's crying out to a God that she might not even believe in. And I just want to be the answer to her prayers. I want to be a faithful witness of who Jesus is, whether I'm able to assist someone out of trafficking or not. In some instances, we've seen a lot of success, and in other instances, I've worked with trafficked girls who've gone back to their pimp, and it's the most heartbreaking thing. But at the end of the day, I know that all I'm called to do is be a friend of Jesus and faithful to the assignment that he's given me. He's not going to ask me when I stand before him how many girls I rescued out of trafficking, or how many porn sites we got regulated or shut down. He's going to ask me if I was faithful, and I want him to say, well done, good and faithful servant, right? We all do. So I'm very, very grateful to do this work. It feels like the greatest privilege of my life. I get excited Sunday nights to wake up and do this Sunday morning, knowing that we're partnering with the great abolitionist, Jesus, who announced his mission in Luke 4, quoting Isaiah 61, that the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon him to preach the good news, to bring liberty to captives and proclaim release from darkness for the prisoners. And that isn't something that's separate to the gospel. It's very much connected to the gospel and the overflow of wanting to see God's kingdom here on earth. So, yeah.
Wonderfully put. Thank you, Helen. I mean, you're describing I guess two things it sounds you're saying in terms of your faith is your why. It's kind of what you do it for, but also it seems to be the way that you're doing it too. It's kind of the reason you're wanting to see injustice overcome, but also why you're wanting to care for the most broken and overlooked is because of your faith. And have you any? What are the stories of hope? What are the stories of healing that when you're feeling weary of doing good works, are the ones you turn to and you remind yourself of? What? Yeah.
I remember when I first got into this work, hearing that quote by Corrie ten Boom, "There's no pit too deep that God's love isn't deeper still." And I really learned about what trafficking was, sitting at the feet of trafficking survivors who were telling me their stories, and I was having to officially interview a lot of them. And I remember one girl who'd gone through the most intense human suffering, off the scale. It was almost like my brain couldn't even compute how anyone could ever go through something like that or survive something like that. And she had HIV from the trauma inflicted on her in trafficking. And yet her eyes were so full of light and hope and love, and she'd encountered Jesus' love and felt grateful to even be alive, and felt grateful for every day, and knew that she had a home waiting for her in heaven. And to see the power of Jesus' love that could heal someone who'd gone through such trauma, such utter suffering, those survivors became my heroes. And it's at the back of my mind, I just know that there's no one too far gone. There's no one so captive to the chains of the enemy or darkness that God's love isn't deeper still. And now we're seeing that even from these top pornography directors and even traffickers we've interviewed who've come to faith and now wanting to be part of prevention, be part of the solution, working with men. The sex buyers that we've interviewed who, I think of Gene McConnell, who's in our documentary Buying Her. He encountered God's love through a mentor who completely met him in that place of shame. And I get so encouraged when I hear stories of sex buyers who've completely changed and reformed, as well as the survivors. And one of my co-workers is a trafficking survivor. She was trafficked in Las Vegas. She's gone on to have an incredible family. She went back to school to study law and just got her master's from Oxford on international human rights. And she's our director of public policy. And she is the most profound example of someone who you wouldn't even know that she'd gone through something like trafficking. She's so healed. She's so whole. She's so walking in her purpose and destiny, and now changing the world, and I get to work alongside her. And so when I see the impact that trafficking survivors go on to make, I feel so inspired that God's using them to bring about incredible change. And we're only just getting started.
Yeah, I heard recently just this really simple phrase, and we would know it's true, and it's certainly what you're describing here, that the Bible says we are, by the wounds of Jesus we are healed. But it's through our wounds often that others are healed. He heals others through us and through our wounds. It's often in our own brokenness as well as his brokenness that we see healing. And that's what you're saying there, isn't it? Which is a beautiful part, I think, of what the gospel is. Few final questions. Where would you like society to be on this issue of trafficking, pornography, that intersection that we've chatted about in, let's say, 10 years' time? What would you like? And what do you think even is realistic, I guess, for 10 years?
It's crazy to even think about 10 years' time, and 2035 feels a long way off.
Yeah.
And I feel like the things we're seeing in the technology development with AI, I feel like we'll have a whole new set of problems. So we need to start passing policy and laws that will be thinking 3 steps ahead of what could possibly be taking place. But I think on a very simple level, passing age and consent verification for those in porn, and regulating exploitation out of porn in all manner of ways and seeing what's even left after that. Passing age verification laws in every country where you have to be over 18 at least to consume porn, and raising the age to 21 of those entering porn. Those are like some very minimum laws and things I'd want to see and get passed. But I mean, there's 20 other things I could say in my mind, but those are some of the main things.
Is there anything that's less legislation driven for you? Is there a cultural mindset change, or is there something that you could articulate around that?
Thinking back to comparing big porn and big tobacco, I think that, you know, it feels a bit unthinkable in some ways to think 70 years ago smoking was so widespread that people smoked on planes and doctors completely endorsed smoking, and culturally it was completely considered normal. And so in 70 years, but even I feel like it's been in the last 20 years, there's been a lot more intentional campaigning, and the government has gotten involved and shared this to be a public health crisis. But it's like laws impact culture and culture impacts law. It's always one influencing the other and both going together. So I would want to see our culture recognizing porn to be harmful, a harmful industry, a very addictive substance, especially for children, and to consider the lives of the real women in these videos. And that's only really going to come from survivors speaking out and saying, yes, you saw me in porn, but I wasn't fully consenting. I had a pimp, and I, or just giving a fuller story, humanizing themselves. There's so much dehumanization that happens through porn that I'd want to see culturally, us humanizing the people behind it to the point where it would be unthinkable to choose to watch to watch two homeless people having sex in the corner, for example. They're in a very vulnerable situation, and instead of wanting to help them, we pay money to watch them have sex with each other. Like, if that was happening in the natural, people would think that was very strange and you're a voyeuristic person who's engaging in that. But in the digital world, there's all kinds of pornography that's being watched and consumed, and people aren't even thinking twice about that, or how it's causing them to be dehumanized by engaging in that. I mean, I see personally the porn industry as the biggest drug dealer of our time, and you know, people compare porn to sugar. I think it's more fentanyl or heroin. Children are being injected from these companies via the internet every day. And if that was happening in real life, can you imagine the lawsuits? Can you imagine the parents? Like, our entire class was injected with heroin by a drug dealer. Like, there would be such cultural outrage. But yeah, in the digital world, that's happening every day. And so we want to see parents so outraged by the way that big porn companies are trying to be the sex educators of their children, to actually take more ownership over the conversations that they have with their kids, and really being intentional and not just leaving it to the culture or their schools or the porn sites to teach their kids about sex and relationships, but they are the ones who talk about all of that with their kids first, and feel the most outraged at the way that the porn companies are largely unregulated, giving their kids access to these sites. I think of the genre of porn, of all the incest genres, as well as, I mean, don't get me started on the racist and the bestiality type content on porn. The incest theme genres, you know, we hear from domestic violence groups, we hear from child protection groups. There is there's a good friend of mine who's a nurse who says that the amount of sex acts that they are seeing from children coming into their hospital that they know are directly inspired by pornography, of another child or of a teenager who is consuming porn and then acting that out on a child or a younger sister. And she said the cases have escalated, and they are so pornographic in nature that we know there's a correlation. And so my heart is broken for what is currently going on right now. And there isn't shame in this. I think of this teenager or child, like, you were a victim of this porn industry that is going after you, that wants to own your sexuality, that wants to make an imprint and have you as a financial subscriber to their website for life. Like, I was in the private meetings in Hollywood with the porn industry, and they had zero concern that children are watching porn, and they were actually furious and angry that laws were going to protect children. Yeah. Right? That tells you everything. We need to think, who are the people behind this industry? And I want people to feel angry about porn, not only what it's doing to women and children in relationships, but what it's the way that they're operating and the way that they've evaded all kinds of accountability, responsibility, regulation is criminal. And so I want people to feel that sense of I'm taking back and reclaiming my sexuality, and I'm not letting it be dictated by an industry that does not have my interests at heart and that actually wants to cause me harm. And us understanding this in terms of mental health, like we might with a gambling addiction. I just think it's this silent epidemic that people are struggling with, and children are suffering with. They don't even understand what's happening. We're actually currently making a documentary right now of girls and women who are addicted to pornography around like between the ages of 18 to late 20s. These are girls who are exposed on their phones, most of them under the age of 10, and the stigma around young girls watching porn and the psychological impact, the eating disorders that it led to, the self-harm that it led to, the dysfunctional and abusive relationships it led to, because choking and suffocating in sex was normalized through porn. These are things that are not being talked about, that so many parents are completely unaware that their young child is consuming, and the harm that it's having on their life, even in families that you would never think that this would be taking place in. So yeah, as far as like cultural reform, cultural rebellion against the pornification in our culture, that's what I want to see. And not just the fear-mongering about porn, but conversations around healthy sexuality and true freedom and true, like, what is the deeper, higher purposes of sex, and what does that look like in a healthy context? And people feeling there's no taboo around talking about that.
Amazing. Helen, thank you so much for your time and for your vulnerability and your honesty, but also for what you're doing. It's just amazing to hear the impact that you as an organisation are having, and that you have given yourself and sacrificed to enable that and be part of that story. So thank you, and thanks for spending time with us.
Thank you, it's an honour.